The source wall did not break. It shattered. There was no warning, not even for beings who existed beyond time and space. One moment, the great barrier at the edge of all existence stood as it always had. An infinite monument of trapped gods and fallen conquerors. Their bodies fused into the cosmic membrane that separated the known universe from the unknowable void beyond. And then, in a single catastrophic instant, it was gone. Not weakened. Not cracked. Gone. The shockwave that followed moved faster than light. Faster than thought. A ripple of pure ontological violence that tore through dimensions like paper. Collapsing realities that had no names. Folding space into geometries that no living mind could process. Orion felt it before he saw it. He was aboard a New Genesis Patrol Vessel 3. Light years from the wall when the force hit him, pressure behind his eyes like the universe itself was screaming. The astroforce inside him, that crackling, magnificent engine of cosmic power that lived in his blood and bones and fury, lurched. It recognized the shockwave, the way a child recognizes the sound of their home collapsing. His hands found the hull of the ship instinctively, fingers tearing through reinforced New Genesis alloy like it was wet clay. Orion. Lightray's voice cut through the chaos. Solus, whom most called Lightray, had already shed his physical density, converting his body into photonic energy to ride out the shockwave's initial pulse. He reformed beside Orion in a cascade of golden brilliance, his expression tight with something that Orion almost never saw on his companion's face. Fear. The wall, Lightray said. Not a question. A eulogy. The breach opened between them without invitation. It was not a boom tube. Orion knew boom tubes the way soldiers know gunfire. Intimate and visceral. This was something else entirely. This was a wound in reality, ragged at the edges, pulsing with energies that did not belong to any universe either of them had ever visited. The pull was immediate and absolute. New Genesis engineering was irrelevant. The vessel's engines, capable of crossing star systems in hours, fired at maximum thrust and accomplished nothing. The breach consumed them, ship, gods, and all, in less than a second. What came out the other side was not a vessel. It was two gods, falling. The sky above New York City had seen extraordinary things. It had witnessed alien invasions and gamma-radiated giants and men in iron, suits punching through clouds at supersonic speeds. It had, on more than one occasion, briefly turned orange with celestial energy. But when the breach opened over Manhattan at 11:47 in the morning on a Tuesday in October, even by the extraordinary standards of the Marvel Universe's most beleaguered metropolitan area, what fell through it was something new. Orion hit the Hudson River like a meteorite. The impact vaporized approximately 40 meters of river water in a column of superheated steam, sent a shockwave rolling outward that shattered every window within 6 blocks, and registered as a 4.2 magnitude seismic event at monitoring stations across the eastern seaboard. He sank to the riverbed, 40 feet of water reduced to a crater of river mud and stone, and lay there for exactly 3 seconds before the astroforce reasserted itself. He rose. Steam poured from his armor, the distinctive red and blue of New Genesis, designed streaming water as he climbed into the air above the river, the astroglider materializing beneath him with a sound like a thunderclap. His eyes, those terrible, burning eyes that held Darkseid's blood and Highfather's blessing in equal, warring measure, swept across the Manhattan skyline. Towers of steel and glass, ground vehicles in gridlock, billions of life signatures compressed into an island smaller than some of New Genesis's lesser gardens. A primitive world, technologically speaking, but alive, vibrantly, chaotically, magnificently alive. He could feel it even through the disorientation of dimensional transit, through the ringing, in his skull and the wrongness, of cosmic energies that weren't quite what he was accustomed to. The life here had a texture he didn't recognize, not the clean geometric certainty of New Genesis's harmony, not the grinding, crushing despair signature of apocalypse. Something rawer, something fighting. Lightray descended beside him in a column of golden light, re-solidifying with practiced ease. Unlike Orion's crater-generating arrival, Solus had converted to photons mid-transit and ridden the dimensional shockwave like a surfer, emerging from the breach at controlled velocity. He looked across the skyline with wide eyes that were already calculating distances, energy signatures, threat assessments. Populated world, lightray said. Humanoid dominant species. Technology approximately equivalent to. I know where we are, Orion said. His voice was low and controlled, which meant he was working very hard to keep it that way. Orion's control was always a performance, a careful architecture of will built, over a lifetime specifically, to contain what lived in his blood. We are not in our universe. The energies are wrong, lightray confirmed. The source wall's collapse created a dimensional funnel. We were caught in the transition zone when he stopped, looked at Orion. We are stranded. Yes. Below them, on the streets of Manhattan, people were running. Not all of them, some were pointing. Some were already pulling out recording devices, with the particular New York instinct that separated genuine panic from morbid curiosity. But emergency signals were already pulsing across frequencies. Orion could detect even without specialized equipment. Someone had called for help. He wondered what kind of help this universe sent. He didn't have to wonder long. The Quinjet appeared from the north, moving fast, its stealth systems, impressive by local standards, doing nothing to hide it from Orion's senses. Behind it, a red and gold streak was already closing from the south and from the east, moving with the specific purposeful velocity of someone who could bench press a battleship. Came a figure in blue and red. Not Superman. Different energy signature, different bearing, but comparable power level. Orion's astroforce registered the approaching figure and hummed with something between recognition and anticipation. Thor Odinson hit the air brake 50 meters away. Mjolnir spinning down to rest, golden hair wild from flight. Blue eyes already assessing with the calm efficiency of a warrior who had fought things that broke lesser beings across 3 realms. He looked at Orion. Orion looked at him. The astroforce crackled along Orion's gauntlets, instinctive and hungry. Lightray put a hand on his companion's arm. Orion, wait. If you want to see more crossover stories like this, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see cross universes in the comments below. May the Force be with you. Thor was not a man who intimidated easily. He had stood before the Midgard serpent and felt its breath poison the air around him. He had faced Galactus, not bargained with him, not fled from him, but stood before the world devourer with Mjolnir raised and refused to move. He had looked into the eyes of his father's greatest enemies and found in himself not fear but the clean, clarifying fire of a warrior who has accepted that some battles are simply worth dying for. Thor Odinson did not intimidate easily, but the being hovering 50 meters away on a glowing cosmic sled, wreathed in crackling energy that smelled like ozone and something older and stranger, with eyes that held the specific quality of barely contained devastation. That being made the lightning in Mjolnir respond, not in fear, in recognition. The hammer knew power the way a compass knows north, and what it was pointing at right now was something it had never pointed at before, something equal. I am Thor Odinson, the Asgardian said. His voice carried across the river wind without effort, the natural projection of someone accustomed to addressing armies. Son of Odin, protector of Midgard. A pause, deliberate and measured. You will identify yourselves. It was Lightray who answered. Orion was still doing that thing he did, that terrible, focused silence that meant he was running calculations that ended in violence. Solus stepped forward in the air, his golden armor catching the October sunlight, hands open and visible. The gesture was universal. Every warrior culture across every universe Solus had ever visited understood open hands. I am Lightray of New Genesis, he said. My companion is Orion, son of High Father. A fraction of a pause, a careful editorial choice. We arrived without invitation. The dimensional barrier at the edge of our universe collapsed and we were caught in the transit. We mean no harm to this world or its people. Thor's eyes moved from lightray to Orion. Stayed there. Your companion's arrival caused significant structural damage to the riverbed and registrable seismic disruption across your eastern continental shelf, Thor said. For someone meaning no harm, he makes a considerable crater. He always lands hard, lightray said, with the particular tired affection of someone who has been saying this for centuries. The Quinjet had circled twice before landing on the nearest available rooftop, which belonged to a building whose owners would spend the next 3 weeks in an insurance dispute about unauthorized superhero use of private property. From it emerged a team that Orion catalogued. In the 3 seconds it took them to arrange themselves on the rooftop's edge, a man in a red, white and blue uniform carrying a shield of unusual metallurgical composition, a woman whose energy signature pulsed with something Orion's instincts flagged as cosmic adjacent, a large man in a suit of green and gold armor, and 2 others whose capabilities were less immediately apparent but whose tactical positioning suggested significant combat experience. The Avengers. Orion didn't know the name yet, but he knew a strike team when he saw one. Captain America assessed the situation with the rapid, unsentimental efficiency that had kept him alive through impossible odds for decades. 2 unknown beings, humanoid in appearance, one demonstrably capable of impact forces in the Superman range, one whose light-based abilities were already on display as he communicated with Thor, neither displaying overt hostility, both displaying the specific, careful stillness of beings who were very dangerous and very aware that they were very dangerous. He clicked his comm. Stark. Already seeing it, Iron Man's voice came back. The armor sensors feeding data in real time. Energy signatures are off every chart I have. Whatever that crackling stuff around the big one is. It's not gamma. It's not cosmic radiation as we understand it. It's not Asgardian in origin. Jarvis is calling it unprecedented, which is his polite way of saying he has absolutely no idea. Threat assessment. A pause that lasted exactly long enough to be concerning. The big one? If he wanted to, Steve, I think would know about it. I'm reading impact force potential that is genuinely in the Thor range. Maybe above. The other one is light speed capable and generating photonic constructs that could cut through most of what we have. Another pause. I'd recommend talking first. That was always the plan, Cap said. The conversation that followed happened in the air above the Hudson, Thor serving as the de facto intermediary between the Avengers, growing assembly and the 2 new gods. It was not a comfortable conversation. Orion had no gift for diplomacy and no patience for the circling, careful language of beings who hadn't yet decided if they were going to fight. He answered questions in the blunt, declarative sentences of someone who considered deception a waste of breath, which the Avengers found simultaneously reassuring and alarming. Yes, he was from another universe. No, he had not chosen to come here. Yes, he was aware of the damage his arrival had caused, and would make restitution if this universe had a concept of restitution that applied to gods. No, he did not require food, water, or shelter in any conventional sense. Yes, the Astroforce was a weapon. No, he was not currently planning to use it. Currently, Iron Man repeated, from inside his helmet. I said what I said, Orion replied. It was Thor who cut through the tension, with the directness that made him valuable in exactly these situations. He turned to Orion, hammer resting in his grip with deceptive casualness, and said, You carry the weight of a warrior who has not stopped fighting long enough to know what peace feels like. I recognize it. I have worn it myself. A beat. What are you fighting? Orion looked at him for a long moment. And then, because the question was honest and honesty was the only language he fully trusted, he answered it. Something followed us through the breach, he said quietly. Something from the void beyond. The source wall. Something that was waiting for the wall to fall. His burning eyes moved from Thor to the sky above. Manhattan, scanning, always scanning. We did not come here alone. And what came with us is going to find this world very shortly. The wind off the Hudson felt suddenly colder. Lightray, who had been monitoring dimensional frequencies since their arrival with the portion of his consciousness he kept perpetually dedicated to threat assessment, went very still. His golden glow flickered once, something Orion had never seen it do before. "Orion," Solus said softly. "I know," Orion said. "High above Manhattan, at an altitude where commercial aircraft don't fly." The sky began to tear. The tear in the sky was not like the breach that had delivered Orion and Lightray to this universe. That breach had been violent and sudden. A wound caused by catastrophic structural failure. The dimensional equivalent of a dam breaking. This was different. This was deliberate. This was something on the other side of reality pushing, methodically and with terrible patience, finding the weakened dimensional membrane where they source wall's collapse had thinned the barrier between existence and the void, and applying pressure with the specific, unhurried confidence of something that had never encountered a door it couldn't eventually open. The sky above Manhattan darkened in a circle approximately 2 kilometers in diameter. Not clouds. Not weather. The light itself was being consumed. Photons ceasing to exist at the boundary of the circle as whatever pressed against the membrane began to feed on the energy of this universe in preparation for full materialization. Birds fell silent across the entire borough. Electronic systems within the affected radius began failing, not surging, not shorting, simply stopping, as though power itself was being drained away. Car alarms died mid-wail. The Quinjet's auxiliary systems dropped to emergency backup in seconds. Iron Man's voice in the comm was clipped and precise, the tone he used when fear was present but being firmly managed. Jarvis is registering a localized entropy event. Energy absorption across a 2-kilometer radius. Whatever is up there is eating light and electricity like a pre-battle appetizer. Can you quantify it? Cap asked. No. Which is the part that worries me. Thor was already airborne. Jolnir crackling with enough charge to level a city block. Lightning threading between the hammer's head and the darkening. Sky above in angry, probing arcs. The Asgardian's instincts were older than science and considerably more reliable in situations that science hadn't catalogued yet. He felt what was pressing against the sky the way he felt. Ragnarok, not as a concept but as a presence. Something ancient and antithetical to the ordered existence of gods and men alike. Orion was beside him before Thor had consciously registered movement. The new god moved with the astroforce fully ignited now. No longer banked and controlled but burning at operational capacity. A corona of crackling cosmic energy surrounding him that made the air itself ionize in his wake. Up close, at full power, the sheer physical reality of Orion was something that even Thor's considerable experience required a moment to process. The Asgardian had a warrior's instinct for mass and force, and what that instinct told him about the being flying beside him was that this was not someone he would enjoy fighting. Good. Because right now, he needed an ally, not a sparring partner. What is it? Thor asked, without preamble. The Void Disciples, Orion said. The words came out flat and heavy, the way soldiers say the names of enemies they fought before and survived, and never quite recovered from. Entities that exist beyond the source wall, beyond our universe, beyond yours. They don't have goals the way you or I understand goals. They don't want power or territory or conquest. They want cessation, the end of structured existence, the collapse of all walls between all things until everything becomes nothing. Thor was quiet for 1 second. How large is their force? Unknown. The source. Wall's collapse would have released hundreds of them at minimum. A pause. Possibly more. Another second of silence. How do you kill them? The astroforce disrupts their coherence, Orion said. Sufficient energy, the right kind of energy, destabilizes their form and forces them back into the void. They can be defeated. It requires significant power, applied with precision. His eyes cut sideways to Thor. Your lightning. What is its fundamental nature? It is the storm, Thor said simply. Life energy. the force of creation and destruction in balance. Orion's expression shifted. Fractionally, the closest thing to approval he typically managed. That will work. The first Void disciple came through the tear at 12:03 p.m. It had no shape that human neurology was equipped to process directly. Security cameras in the area would later show footage of what appeared to be a sphere of absolute darkness approximately 30 meters in diameter, surrounded by a penumbra of collapsing light. Human witnesses reported different things. Some saw a vast face with empty eyes. Some saw the space between stars given malevolent purpose. Some simply experienced a profound and terrifying certainty that existence was temporary, and the universe had made a mistake in happening at all. The psychological effect was not incidental. It was the Void disciple's primary weapon, a field of existential negation that it projected ahead of itself like a bow wave. Iron Man's repulsors fired first, because Tony Stark's response to the unknown was always to shoot it and see what happened. The energy beams hit the Void disciples' outer membrane and were absorbed, without visible effect, the photonic energy simply ceasing to exist at the point of contact. "Okay," Iron Man said. "Repulsors are out." Captain America's shield, thrown with the precision of 30 years of combat experience, passed through the entity without resistance and returned to his hand. The Void disciple didn't react because the shield had not, from its perspective, made contact with anything real. "Physical objects are also out," Cap reported, catching his shield, with the calm of a man cataloging data rather than experiencing the dawning horror of tactical irrelevance. Light ray hit the entity from the eastern approach at approximately 0.8 light speed, converting himself to hard photonic energy at the moment of impact rather than maintaining biological form. The effect was the first positive result of the engagement. The Void disciple's membrane rippled, its coherence disrupting momentarily around the point of contact, the absolute darkness flickering, to reveal something underneath that was worse than darkness, a glimpse of actual void, genuine nothingness, the space between universes given temporary and malevolent agency. Then the entity's negation field caught Light Ray as he reformed, and Solar screamed, not in pain exactly, but in the specific anguish of a being made of light, encountering something that considered light a resource to be consumed. He tumbled from the sky, his golden glow stuttering, reforming 30 meters lower with visible effort. Orion saw it happen. What lived in Orion's blood, what Darkseid had put there before, Highfather's grace had tried to bury. It did not respond to tactical calculations or strategic assessments in moments like this. It responded to one thing: his closest friend was hurt, and something had hurt him. The astroforce detonated outward from Orion's hands in a column of energy that hit the Void disciple like a small star being born at point-blank range. The entity's coherence didn't ripple this time. It shattered the Void disciple's form, fragmenting into collapsing bands of darkness that dissipated rapidly, the nothingness unable to maintain structure against the specific, devastating frequency of New Genesis cosmic power. The engagement had lasted 11 seconds. Everyone present stared at where the Void disciple had been. Then the tear above Manhattan widened by a factor of 4, and 17 more Void disciples began pushing through simultaneously. Thor's lightning filled the sky as Mjolnir swung into a wide arc, the Asgardian's voice rising in something that was equal parts war cry and prayer. Iron Man was already broadcasting on every Avenger frequency simultaneously, across the city, across the country, in space and underground, and in dimensions adjacent to this one. Signals were going out to every significant power this universe possessed. Orion ignited the Astroforce to full operational capacity for the first time since arriving in this universe. The light it produced was visible from orbit. Light ray, still reforming, still burning at reduced capacity from the negation field's touch, looked up at his oldest friend blazing against the darkening sky above Manhattan, and felt something complicated move through him. Pride, terror, the specific heartache of knowing someone you love is about to do something extraordinary and devastating, and possibly irreversible. Don't lose yourself up there, Solar said quietly, knowing Orion couldn't hear him. Above them, the war for a universe that wasn't theirs had begun. The first hour of the battle broke 3 city blocks, 2 interstate highway overpasses, and every prior understanding the Avengers had ever developed about the upper limits of sustainable combat. Orion fought the way his blood demanded, not with strategy initially, not with the careful geometric precision that New Genesis training had tried to impose on Darkseid's inheritance, but with something rawer and more fundamental. He fought the way a star burns, total and consuming and indifferent to the cost. The Astroforce at full capacity was not a weapon in any conventional sense. It was a condition, a localized state of cosmic violence that warped the battlefield around him, where Void disciples came apart on contact with his energy field, before he'd consciously aimed at them, where the shockwaves from his movement alone were enough to disrupt the negation fields that had made Iron Man's repulsors irrelevant. Thor matched him, not equaled. The honest accounting of the battle's first hour would show Orion operating at a level that even the Asgardians' considerable power could not quite reach. But Thor Odinson had something that raw power couldn't quantify. 3,000 years of learning how to fight things that were stronger than him. He didn't try to match Orion's output. He worked the angles, directing Mjolnir's lightning into the disruption points that Orion's Astroforce created, amplifying the effect, turning single Void disciple destructions into cascading collapses that took 3 or 4 entities simultaneously. They didn't coordinate verbally. They didn't need to. Warriors of sufficient experience develop a battlefield language that operates below conscious thought, and within 20 minutes of fighting side by side, Thor and Orion had arrived at something, approaching fluency in each other's combat dialect. Captain America watched them work from street level, where he was coordinating the evacuation of Lower Manhattan, with the specific, organized ferocity that made him irreplaceable in situations where his physical capabilities were largely irrelevant. The Void Disciples' negation fields made conventional weapons useless, which meant the Avengers on the ground were performing triage rather than combat, getting civilians clear, maintaining communication networks, preparing contingencies for scenarios that Cap's considerable tactical imagination was generating faster than he could evaluate them. "Stark," he said into the comm, "tell me you have something." "Working on it," Iron Man said, his voice carrying the particular, strained quality of a genius operating at the absolute boundary of his capability and not quite keeping up. He was flying high, above the main engagement, Jarvis running 17 simultaneous analyses of the Void Disciples' physical properties based on the data lightray had provided. During a brief window of communication, the photonic disruption lightray caused gives me something to work with. These things can't absorb or negate energy that operates above a certain frequency threshold. It's not that they're invulnerable. It's that most of what we throw at them is operating in ranges they can simply consume. We need to go higher. Much higher. How much higher? Orion range higher, which I cannot currently generate and neither can most of our team. A pause. I'm calling in everything we have. Strange is en route. Thor's already here, obviously. I've put out signals to the Fantastic Four, to anyone in the cosmic tier who's in range. The X-Men, Cap said. A brief silence. Steve, Xavier's people operate in energy ranges we don't, if any of them can, adapt to this frequency requirement. Already sent the signal, Iron Man said, in the tone of a man who had thought of it first, and was mildly irritated at the implication otherwise. Also, and I want you to stay calm when I say this. Tony. I contacted the Fantastic Four's deep space monitoring array and asked Reed to check whether the dimensional breach above us is isolated to this location. The pause that followed was precisely calibrated. It isn't. There are 7 additional breach points opening globally. Mumbai, London, Beijing, Sao Paulo, Nairobi, Sydney, and one in the Pacific that Jarvis is placing, approximately over the former location of Atlantis. Cap absorbed this, processed it, filed the emotional response for later. Orion, he said, looking up to where the new god blazed against the darkening sky. We need him coordinating, not just fighting. Getting Orion to stop fighting long enough to think was Lightray's problem, and Solus had extensive experience with it. He caught up with Orion during a 3-second window between engagements, matching the new god's flight path and getting close enough that Orion's peripheral vision registered him as something other than a target. The astroforce banked slightly, automatically, the way it always did around Lightray, some deep instinct in Orion that predated training and philosophy recognizing his oldest friend as a fixed point around which destruction should curve rather than flow. 7 breach points, Lightray said, without preamble, because preamble with Orion was a waste of both their time. Global. The Void Disciples aren't attacking this city specifically. They're attacking the dimensional membrane everywhere it's weakened. Manhattan is one front of a worldwide incursion. Orion's burning eyes swept the sky. Counted. Calculated. The part of him that was Darkseid's blood wanted to stay here, wanted to reduce every Void Disciple within range to its component nothingness and call it victory. The part of him that was Highfather's grace, smaller, quieter, but bedrock, understood what Lightray was telling him. We can't fight them on 7 fronts simultaneously, Orion said. No, Lightray agreed. But we can close the breach points. Explain. The Void Disciples need the breach points to maintain cohesion in this universe. Without a connection to the Void, their forms destabilize naturally over time. If we can collapse the dimensional tiers, Lightray's golden glow had stabilized, his power returning to near full capacity despite the earlier negation field contact. His recovery rate was one of his least celebrated and most valuable abilities. We strand whatever has already come through and prevent further incursion. The entities already here become manageable. The ones beyond the membrane cannot enter. To collapse a dimensional breach of this magnitude, Orion said slowly, requires energy output at source wall level. Or multiple energy sources operating in concert, Lightray said. The right combination of powers, the right frequencies. Combined with the Astroforce, Orion finished. He was already thinking architecturally, the battlefield calculus shifting from how many can I destroy to how do we end this. Thor's lightning operates in creation frequencies. Strange, if this universe has a sorcerer of sufficient capability, could provide dimensional anchoring. Your photonic energy could carry the combined output as a delivery mechanism. A pause. It would require precise coordination. Yes, Lightray said. And I would need to reduce my Astroforce output during the process. Controlled rather than maximum. Yes, Lightray said again, more carefully. Orion didn't say anything for a moment. Controlled rather than maximum. For Orion, that was not a tactical preference. That was a battle fought internally, against inheritance, against the howling thing in his blood that knew no. Setting between restrained and cataclysmic. Lightray watched him have that fight, as he had watched him have it 1,000 times before, and waited. Tell the Armored One to coordinate his people across the 7 sites. Orion said finally, Thor and Strange work with me on the primary breach above this city. We collapse this one first. Use the resonance to trigger cascade collapses at the secondary sites. He looked at Lightray. You're the delivery mechanism. I know, Lightray said. It will hurt. I know that too. Dr. Strange arrived over Manhattan at 1:34 p.m., the cloak of levitation spreading behind him as the Eye of Agamotto cast its distinctive golden light across the chaos below. He took in the battlefield in the rapid, comprehensive way of someone whose career required immediate threat assessment across multiple dimensions, simultaneously, and arrived at his conclusions in approximately 4 seconds. He flew directly to Orion. The new god looked at the sorcerer with the evaluating gaze he turned on everyone. Measuring, calculating, filing. Strange met it without flinching, which moved him several positions up. Orion's internal ranking of this universe's inhabitants. Lightray told me the plan, Strange said. The dimensional anchoring component is viable. The Eye of Agamotto can stabilize the breach geometry while your energy collapses it inward. But I want to be clear about something. His eyes, ancient and sharp and carrying the specific weight of a man who had seen the multiverse and survived it, held Orion's without wavering. The resonance cascade you're describing, if it works, will send a shockwave through every weakened dimensional point globally. It will close the breach points. A pause. It will also register as the largest single expenditure of combined energy this universe has ever produced. Things will notice. Old things. Powerful things. You may solve this problem and create 3 others. Orion looked at him. You have an alternative. No, Strange admitted. I just want you to understand the full picture. I always understand the full picture, Orion said. I simply choose to act anyway. Strange considered this for precisely 1 second. Then, with the slight smile of a man who recognizes something of himself in an unexpected place, then let's close some holes in reality. Above them, the primary breach had expanded to nearly 1 kilometer in diameter. Through it, in the void beyond, something vast was moving. Something that made the 17 Void disciples already engaged across Manhattan seem, in sudden and terrible perspective, like a vanguard, a scout force. What was coming next was the army. Thor appeared at Orion's left, Mjolnir singing with stored lightning. Strange took position at his right, the eye-opening fully, golden geometric constructs, already mapping the breach's dimensional architecture. Light ray ascended above all of them, his form shifting fully into photonic energy, becoming the conduit they needed him to be, a being of pure light preparing to carry the most powerful combined energy discharge this universe had ever seen. Orion looked at the breach, looked at what moved beyond it, felt in his blood the pull to simply unleash everything, to burn and burn until there was nothing left to burn. The old Apocalypse inheritance singing its familiar, seductive song, chose, instead, precision. On my mark, he said. The mark came without a countdown. Orion had never been a being who announced his intentions to the universe before acting on them. Announcements were for those who needed the enemy to know they were coming, who required the psychological architecture of a dramatic moment to convince themselves to act. Orion required nothing of the sort. When the Astroforce shifted from combat mode to what could only be described as architectural mode, pulling inward rather than projecting outward, compressing rather than detonating, it happened with the quiet, absolute certainty of a natural law being invoked. Thor felt it first. The lightning in Mjolnir responded to the frequency shift the way iron responds to a magnet, the hammer's ancient power recognizing a compatible resonance and leaning toward it instinctively. The Asgardian released conscious control of his output and let the storm come fully, not directed at enemies but fed into the growing combined field that Orion was building between them. 3,000 years of storm energy, flowing into a framework that New Genesis engineering had designed, and Apocalypse blood was currently holding together through sheer, disciplined will. Strange contribution was different in character but not in commitment. The eye of Agamotto opened to a degree that Strange reserved for the most catastrophic dimensional emergencies. Its golden light not adding raw power to the combined field but providing something more essential: geometry, structure. I could perceive dimensional architecture, the way an engineer perceives a blueprint, and what Strange was doing, with the particular silent ferocity of a man who had once held the entirety of the time, stone's power and survived it, was mapping the breach's exact dimensional coordinates and feeding that map directly into the combined field, giving Orion's Astroforce a precise target rather than a general direction. And light ray burned. The conversion from biological to photonic was never painful for Solus in normal circumstances. He had made the transition thousands of times, lived in both states with equal comfort, worn light the way other beings wore skin. But what Orion was asking of him now was not the conversion. It was the channeling, becoming, the conduit through which 3 incompatible power sources were harmonized and delivered. a living transmission line carrying energies that individually could level continents. The photonic form that was light ray stretched and restructured under the load. Golden brilliance shifting through frequencies visible and invisible. The being that was Solus reduced temporarily to something that was more physics than person. It hurt in ways that light ray would later decline to describe in detail. He carried it anyway. Because Orion had asked. Because the universe required it. Because some things are simply worth the cost. And the only question that matters is whether you are large enough to pay. The void disciples reacted. Whatever passed for intelligence. Among beings whose fundamental nature was the negation of. Structured thought recognized what was being built above Manhattan and responded with the only language they possessed, escalation. The 17 entities engaged. Across the borough abandoned their dispersed assault pattern and converged on the 4 figures at the center of the combined energy field with the coordinated, purposeful movement of a swarm that had identified a threat to the hive. The Avengers met them. Captain. America's shield found new purpose, not as a weapon against the Void disciples themselves but as a coordination tool. The vibranium disc moving between positions at impossible angles as Cap directed his team, with the kind of tactical clarity that emerged only in commanders who had fully accepted that their personal survival was a secondary consideration to the mission's success. Iron Man flew interference patterns that kept Void disciples separated, preventing the negation fields from combining into a single overwhelming force, trading his repulsors for sonic projectors that Strange had hastily calibrated to a frequency that, while insufficient to destroy a Void disciple, could disrupt its movement enough to buy seconds. The X-Men arrived at 2:07 p.m. They came from the west, a Quinjet moving fast and low, and what came out of it was a team that had spent decades operating at the intersection of human limitation and superhuman capability, which meant they had extensive experience with exactly the kind of creative problem-solving that a situation with no conventional solution required. Storm went immediately skyward, her weather manipulation adding to the electromagnetic chaos in ways that interfered with Void disciple cohesion at the edges. Cyclops coordinated ground-level containment with the precise, emotionless efficiency that made him the finest battlefield commander the X-Men possessed. And Jean Grey. Jean Grey went directly to the combined energy field. She looked at what Orion had built, what Strange was mapping and Thor was feeding and Light Ray was carrying. And she understood it in the way that minds of sufficient power understand complex systems, not through analysis but through direct perception, the way a musician hears a chord and knows immediately what note is missing. She added the missing note, the Phoenix Force, even in its controlled, bounded manifestation that Jean maintained through discipline and will, operated in frequencies that no purely technological or purely mystical power source could access. It was life energy at the most fundamental level, the force of creation itself given temporary human habitation. And when Jean fed it carefully, precisely, with the control that had cost her years to develop, into the combined field's outer architecture, something shifted. The field became complete. Orion felt it happen, felt the 4 power sources, Astroforce, Asgardian lightning, Agamotto's dimensional sight, and the contained edge of the Phoenix lock into a resonance that was larger than any of its components, an emergent property of combination that none of them could have achieved alone. The Astroforce recognized it the way a key recognizes a lock, the specific frequency that new Genesis power had always been designed to achieve but rarely found the dimensional conditions to actually reach. He looked at Light Ray, blazing above him, carrying everything they had. Now, Solus, he said quietly. Light Ray delivered. The discharge registered on every scientific instrument on Earth simultaneously, in laboratories across 6 continents, seismographs, electromagnetic sensors, atmospheric monitors, and deep space observatories all recorded the same event at the same moment, a burst of combined energy originating above Manhattan that exceeded every prior measurement in every relevant category by margins that would keep physicists arguing for the next decade. In space, the shockwave was visible, as a pulse of golden white, light that expanded outward from Earth at superluminal speed, washing over satellites, and passing starships and the distant, monitoring arrays of civilizations that had been watching humanity's small blue world with cautious interest for some time. The breach above Manhattan collapsed inward, not explosively, not with the catastrophic release of dimensional energy that Strange had feared as a worst-case outcome. It collapsed the way a soap bubble collapses, suddenly, completely, and without residue, the tear in reality sealing itself as the combined energy field severed the void, disciples' connection to the void, beyond and denied the membranes, weakened points the sustained pressure they needed to remain open. The void disciples still present in Manhattan's airspace, 17 entities of existential negation that had moments ago been converging with terrible purpose, simply stopped cohering. Without the breach to anchor their dimensional presence, they came apart like smoke in wind. The nothingness they were made of returning to the void it had come from. 6 secondary breach points collapsed in cascade. The resonant shockwave, moving through Earth's dimensional membrane and triggering sequential closures that Iron Man's global network of Avenger contacts confirmed one by one over the following 4 minutes. Mumbai, London, Beijing, Sao Paulo, Nairobi, Sydney. 6 confirmations, each one arriving with the particular relief of news that you had hoped for but not quite allowed yourself to expect. The 7th breach point, the one above the Pacific, above the former location of Atlantis, closed last, and not through cascade resonance. It closed because Neymar, who had observed the opening of a dimensional tear above his ancestral waters with the cold fury of a king watching someone track mud through his throne room, had called upon resources that the surface world was not aware he possessed, and dealt with the matter personally, in the characteristically unilateral fashion of someone who has ruled an underwater empire for centuries and sees no compelling reason to ask permission. He would send a very terse message to the Avengers about it afterward. Light ray fell. The photonic form that had carried the combined discharge collapsed back to biological the moment the energy transfer completed, and what reformed in the air above Manhattan was not the composed, golden-armored figure who had stepped out of the dimensional breach that morning, but something considerably more ragged, a being who had been a conduit for forces that biological forms were not designed to channel, paying the physical and neurological cost of that service all at once. Orion caught him. He moved without thinking, the astroglider beneath him before the conscious decision had fully formed, covering the distance between them in a fraction of a second and catching Solus with both arms, the astroforce dimming to its lowest operational setting, a gentleness that Orion almost never bothered with, reserved for very specific circumstances and very specific people. Light ray looked up at him with eyes that were temporarily dim. The golden light reduced to a faint pulse. Did it work? He asked. Yes, Orion said. Good. A pause. You stayed controlled. Don't make it significant. It is significant, Light ray said, with the absolute certainty of someone who has watched Orion fight for centuries and knows exactly how hard controlled is for him. It always is. Orion said nothing, but he didn't put Light ray down either, holding his oldest friend in the air, above a city that was still smoking and broken but intact, still standing, still fundamentally itself, and that, in the accounting of this particular war, was the only number that mattered. Thor descended beside them. Mjolnir at rest, lightning faded. The Asgardians' expression carrying the specific quality of exhausted respect that only emerges between warriors who have stood the same ground under the same fire. He looked at Orion, looked at Light ray, looked at the sealed sky above Manhattan, blue and ordinary and perfect. Well fought, Thor said simply. Orion met his eyes. Your lightning held. It always does, Thor said, with the slight smile of a man quoting a truth rather than making a boast. Strange drifted down last, the eye of Agamotto closed, his hands showing the fine tremor of someone who had operated at maximum thaumaturgic capacity for a sustained period. He looked at Orion with an expression that had moved past evaluation into something more considered. The resonance cascade worked exactly as calculated, he said. Better, actually, with Gray's contribution. He paused. Which means you were right. I usually am, Orion said. So am I, Strange replied. We are going to have an interesting relationship. Captain America found them 20 minutes later, when the immediate crisis management had been handed off to sufficient numbers of competent people that he could briefly stop being a coordinator and briefly start being a human being. He stood in the air, beside Orion, which required a Stark-designed hover platform, and a complete absence of self-consciousness about it, and looked at the new god with the direct, uncomplicated honesty that was Steve Rogers' most disarming quality. You saved this world, Cap said. A world that isn't yours, that you had no obligation to. The Void Disciples would not have stopped at your dimensional boundary. Orion said. They would have consumed this universe and used it as a staging point to reach others. Ultimately, they would have reached New Genesis. A pause. I was protecting my home. Maybe, Cap said. But you could have found another way to do that. One that didn't risk what you risk today. He looked at Lightray, still recovering in the shelter of Orion's arm. Golden light slowly returning to full brightness. Both of you. Orion had no answer for this. Not because he lacked the intelligence to formulate one, but because Steve Rogers had identified something true, and Orion had no interest in arguing with truth. What happens now? Lightray asked. Cap looked between them. That depends on you. The breach that brought you here is sealed. Whether that means you're stranded or whether Strange can find a way to get you home. He glanced at the sorcerer, who responded with the carefully noncommittal expression of a man who was already running the calculations and not yet prepared to share the results. That's a conversation for tomorrow. Tonight, a slight pause, the ghost of something that was almost a smile. Tonight, I think you've more than earned a place to rest. Orion looked at the city below, at the broken blocks and the sealed sky and the people already emerging from shelter to begin the work of repair that humans performed with a consistency that he found, despite himself, genuinely remarkable. Species after species across the universe collapsed under sufficient pressure. These ones rebuilt. Something in that sat differently than he expected. One night, Orion said. One night, Cap agreed. They stayed longer than one night. Strange calculations, delivered with the precise honesty of a man who respected his audience enough not to soften difficult news, indicated that the source wall's collapse had not merely displaced Orion and Lightray, it had restructured the dimensional pathways between their universe and this one in ways that would require months to fully map and potentially longer to safely traverse. They were not permanently stranded, but they were not going home tomorrow. Orion received this information in silence, processed it, filed it under conditions to be adapted to, because adaptation was what warriors did when the battlefield changed. Lightray took it considerably better, with the particular equanimity of someone who finds new universes genuinely interesting rather than merely strategically relevant. In the weeks that followed, the Avengers and they, two new gods, developed something that was not quite friendship and not quite alliance, but occupied the productive space between a working relationship built on mutual respect earned through shared fire, the only currency that beings of their nature fully trusted. Thor and Orion sparred twice, destroying a significant portion of an uninhabited Norwegian island on each occasion, and arrived at a draw both times that satisfied both of them completely. Lightray and Tony Stark spent 3 days in a lab together that produced 12 patents and one ongoing argument about the fundamental nature of photonic energy that neither of them expected to resolve. And in the void beyond the sealed breaches, in the space where the source wall had stood, Something vast and patient noted the outcome, and began, with terrible unhurried purpose, to plan again. The new gods were here now, in this universe, unmoored from their home and surrounded by this remarkable, resilient, impossible species that rebuilt what was broken before the smoke had cleared. Whatever came next, it would find them ready. Orion of New Genesis did not lose. He only ever delayed his winning. May the Force be with you.